Doing good. I just got home from an 11-day trip last night at about 6:30, so I'm still like always takes me a couple days to like settle back in and kind of reacclimate myself. Like, oh, there's people and society and like I
Yeah.
gotta engage and my kid's here and my wife's here and all
Oh,
that lovely stuff. You know what I mean?
yeah. Well, so what trip did you go on?
So it was a bear hunt. So I launched a clothing label, I guess 4 or 5 months. I'm making that sound fancier than it is. I do like t-shirts and hoodies and stuff. And for the launch, what I did was I gave away a guided bear hunt.
Hmm.
So for every $5 you spend on clothes, you got one entry. And then my buddy Jeff Lander owns Primitive Outfitting in northern BC. So I bought a couple hunts from him, and then I took the hunt winner on a hunt and then filmed the hunt with both of us. And then it'll go up on YouTube next week. But he brought a stick bow, which kind of made it extra cool because it's like, I don't know. I'm sure Idaho's the same. Like you can smoke a bear with a rifle at will in BC. Like there's not much sport to it. So it was pretty rad. And he was successful with his stick bow. We didn't get a big bear, but it was a slow week. And we ended up rushing the bear and treat it. And then he smoked it out of the tree. So it was a cool hunt, man. It was super fun. And then after that, we've got another area about 5, 6 hours north of where I was hunting, where I'm running a bunch of trail cams for whitetail and elk and moose. So I ran up there for a day or two and then went back and solo hunted bear for another day or two and then came home. So 11 days total.
Wow. That's awesome, man.
Yeah, it was fun. And before that, I went over to Vancouver Island and hunted, and I got myself a nice bear. Like the guesses are coming in between 15 and 18 years old. Like his teeth are just gone, probably squared at 6'8".
Oh man. Yeah.
Like a real, I got him with my bow and we were like cruising inlets on Vancouver Island on a Zodiac. Like I've never hunted bear like that before. So for me, that was the highlight of my bear season. Like I'm here. It's kind of like we can't bait for bears. So it's like and I think this is maybe something we'll talk about today because that's one of the things I want to pick your brain at. I think the type of topography and vegetation you guys are dealing with in Idaho is very similar to what a lot of us are dealing with here in BC. We don't get the big open Wyoming, Colorado vistas where you're glassing, it's a lot of like dark timber, thick vegetation. And so a ton of our bear hunting is like cruising logging roads and trying to catch them on the move in the middle of the day or before evening, which isn't my favorite way to hunt. But one of the things I've learned is like you don't make the hunt what you want it is. You make the hunt what the hunt is. And the way you kill black bears in BC is cruising logging roads, for most of the province,
Yeah.
unless you're out on the coast. Shocky's outfit isn't too far from where I was hunting on the coast, and there's giant bears over there, and everybody is cruising the inlets for them. And I think that's what I'm going to dedicate most of my bear season to next year. Like that was like hands down the funnest bear hunting I've ever done in my life. I guess it would be similar to what they're doing for black bears on like Prince of Wales or a lot of that stuff up in Alaska.
Yeah. Yeah. That sounds like a lot of fun. Yeah. Bear hunting is, yeah, I do enjoy it. And it sounds very similar. We can't bait bears where we're at either.
Okay.
So yeah, our part
Oh,
of
so is it
Idaho.
only parts? Because some of the Idaho guys I know, like Justin and those guys, they're baiting for bears. So is that like regionally dependent where you're allowed to bait bears?
Yeah. So we live in a grizzly bear recovery zone. And
Okay.
so we're not allowed to bait here. And which I think that's why in some way we have more bears than other parts of Idaho, just because the bait does, there's obviously a little bit of an advantage to that. And, but it's all spot and stock. And
Yep.
it's still, like you said, though, two bears they're pretty delirious that time of the year. So
Yeah.
you can definitely archery them. Sometimes I just get a little lazy. I'm like, oh, I'll just blast it with the rifle.
Yeah.
But my brother Travis, it only takes a couple of spot and stocks, and he's just like, I'm going to do it with the bow. And it's like, okay. And about one or two attempts, and he gets one. So
Yeah.
uh, they're definitely a fun bear or fun animal to spot and stock, no doubt. And then we also have a fall season too. So if we don't fill our tag in the spring, we can always get one in the fall. And pursue them in the huckleberry brush. Yeah. Do you guys get huckleberry brush where you're at?
We do get huckleberry brush. The one thing we have where I'm at, so we have the exact same setup. We go from April 1st to June 30th in most of the province.
Okay.
And then it shuts down and then it opens back up, depending where you are, August 15th to September 1st, and goes to, I don't even know, like October, November. But what's real popular here is moving down to the river country in the fall because the salmon runs start.
Oh, yeah.
Unfortunately, you can't really eat the bear at that point. A lot of guys I know, especially on the islands, like they're just making dog food out of it because with that rotting fish diet, like it's just not an option. But if you want a toad, I mean, you're saving the tag for fall because it's just a lot. They're so focused on eating the salmon that, I got guys who drift rivers for them, and apparently that's super fun too. So I'm hoping to fit some of that in this fall. We don't tend to target them too much in the fall. Probably the same as yourself. Like there's so much more fun stuff to go after. They're almost like a byproduct. Like last year I was out elk hunting. It was day 2. I'm just walking along with my bow solo and like, boom, just jumped a bear. And the thing just ran up a tree. And I'm like, And so I'm looking at the bear and I'm literally like, I took 5 minutes while I'm staring at this bear. I looked at my watch. It was like 9:30 in the morning and I'm doing the mental math. Like, okay, town's an hour and a half away. I could shoot this bear, drag it back to the quad, drop it off at the processor. And I'm like, I could be hunting elk again by 1:00. I'm like, okay, I still got 7 days left for elk. I will take a half a day to smoke this bear, get him to the pros. And so that was what I did. But that's the first time I've ever actually shot a bear in the fall.
Yeah. Oh, was it? Okay.
Yeah. Don't normally worry about them too much. And they tend to move out, I find, of the country where we hunt elk and move down, like I say, more to the rivers and the coastal kind of regions, probably just because the diet is, so rich.
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah. Ours were our huckleberry elevation's about right where at least in the fall, that's about where the elk are rutting, but they don't really mess with the elk, especially on a good huckleberry year. We'll have quarters hanging at our camp, and we even have grizzlies just walk past, within 400 yards or so from our camp, and not even, pretty much neglect the fact that we have meat at camp. But I would be worried if it was a sucky huckleberry year and then you got a problem bear,
Yeah.
And you see, that's when I actually am on edge in the fall, is when you don't have the berries and the bears are just moving. And when you kill something, you better get it worked up. Otherwise the bear's on it quick. So,
that's something else we notice in the spring too, where I hunt bears up north is a very dense grizzly area. And they took away our grizzly hunt maybe 5 years ago now.
Yes.
So they're just getting like, it's brutal now. Brutal. If I go early in May, I will see more grizzly bears. And I'm kind of hunting like mixed ag land. Like I'm kind of like on a big river bottom. I can get up into the mountains pretty quick. But that time of year, you're kind of making it harder than you need to. Like they really like it being in the edges of like the timber and the ag fields. And most of the farmers, it's super easy to get permissions because like everybody just wants the black bears gone because they're kind of a nuisance.
Yeah.
It's not like asking for deer or elk permission. You know what I mean? They're like, no, man, have at her. But the problem is if you don't recover that night, you can almost guarantee the grizzlies will chew up your black bear carcass by the time you get to it the next day. Like really? Normally we had one guy in camp this year that left it out overnight and they were able to recover it. But that's another interesting, like how bad is the veg there? Because I was talking to guys in camp today and he's run his outfit for 18 years and only twice in that time has he recovered a bear that they didn't recover within the first 100 yards. Like if you track for further than 100 yards, their recovery rate almost goes to zero for a combination of how bad blood trails on bears tend to be and how thick the vegetation is. Like even a big bear can like get pretty small, curl up under a root wad. You could walk 5 feet away from that thing and you're not going to find it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I've some of the biggest bears I've killed, when you walk up to them, you're like, there's hardly anything there. Like I shot a small bear, and then when you start, lifting them out of the hole, you're like, oh, there's a lot of there's a lot more bear here than I think there is. And then you realize, oh, it's a big boar,
Yeah.
they'll grow on you sometimes. And yes, I agree with you also on I think a lot of it's the fat.
Yeah.
And like I shot a bear. This was, how many years ago is this? This was 4 years ago. I shot a bear point blank, and I pull up and I see bear shoot, and he runs off, and I tracked him, and it was a big bear, and I tracked him all night with that flashlight, and he was running downhill, and like you said, it was about 200 yards, and I lost blood. I'm like, gosh, like I no way this bear is going to live.
Yeah.
And I sat there and I zigzag, zigzag, zigzag. And then the following year, I was shed hunting that area and I see a bear skull. I was like,
No.
yeah. And I was like, oh, that's rare. I hardly ever find a bear skull in here. And I'm like, wait a minute. That's the bear I shot. There was a big skull. It was a big
Yeah.
skull.
And how far do you reckon that was from where you lost blood?
About
If you had to
350,
guess.
about
Okay.
350 yards.
Okay, so he made it another decent ways.
Yeah, he did. He went downhill and then he took like a hard left,
Yeah.
and I wish I was able, that old of a carcass, you can't really tell where you hit the bear.
Yep.
All I can think is maybe I hit one lung or something. He was kind of quartering. But like I said, I just, I pretty much lined it up with his shoulder,
Yeah.
when I shot. And so, but I think he was angling away to where, and that's happened to me on an elk before.
Yep.
Like angling away from me, shooting, and it just hardly gets vitals, and you just don't think about it, right? Especially when it's
I always think I'm holding far enough back, but then when I watch it back, if I'm lucky enough, I'm like, I'm not. Like, I think we're so focused on that crease. It's like mentally, I know I should be at the back rib, but my pin always seems to land on that crease. And then,
Yeah.
I catch like the front third instead of like right through the meat where I'm hoping to get.
Yeah, you have to be even careful with archery too, because I watched Trav archery a caribou quartering away from him, and he tucked it right to the crease.
Yeah.
And you see the blood just gushing. We're just like, oh man, we were high five and thought it was a dead caribou. And the thing goes back to feeding.
No way.
There's little blood like dripping, but you look, and as it's feeding, there's a hole right behind the shoulder. And the caribou finally laid down, and Trav's belly crawled to it, and he got another arrow in it. But when he checked, it just, all it did, because of the angle, like the ribs, when it's broadside, the ribs are spaced out, but when at a quartering shot, there's less gap there. And that arrow just hit the rib, and it just ran right up and completely, it just glanced right off the rib and just exit without even hitting a single vital.
No way.
So, yeah, it's just crazy thing. But if you were to watch the video, and it's one of the earlier episodes on our YouTube channel, you'll see that caribou and you'll see the blood just pouring out right behind the shoulder. You're just like, that is a dead boo. And it's like, no, it's not. Why is it feeding? Like, what is happening right now?
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I had a weird thing happen on my big bear on Vancouver Island. I was only 15 yards, and I shot a little far forward and a little bit low.
Mm-hmm.
And when I first hit him, I'm like, oh, dead bear, 100%. And then he kind of walks off, and I was standing in a cut block, 10. I was 20 yards from the slash edge. And so the bear only had to walk 10 yards, and he was in the timber. So we backed out. We're like, oh, just let him go pile up. And then we're watching back the footage, and then I get that feeling. I'm like, ugh, that's a little forward and that's a little low. All of a sudden, I'm not as confident as I was kind of 10 minutes ago. So we give him an hour, and we go in, and right where the bear is standing, there's like big blood. And I'm like, that's crazy. I've never seen big blood at all on a bear, let alone right where he was standing, because he started walking kind of immediately. And then I'm following this blood trail, and it's just like he's puking blood, like somebody flicked out a paint can. Like, I'm just like, this is crazy. Go find this log, and it's an elevated log. Like, you know how you get in those cut blocks. Like when you're walking on the log, like you're 7-8 feet off the ground. And he walked right along the log, and you can see the blood coming out of both sides on the log. And he's like 8 yards. Like, he didn't go 30 yards, and he must have died like almost immediately. And I almost want to look up the anatomy. There must be some kind of artery up front because I didn't hit heart, I didn't hit lungs, and that bear died within 30 yards and there was catastrophic blood loss.
Yeah, it must be. My logic as a bears is, and this is something. It's just like deer, elk, and the bear anatomy is so different. And on a bear like that, a lot of the vitals all connect. Kind of getting closer to the throat. But
Yeah.
the downside is the lungs. I feel like on a bear are a little bit farther back. I
Yeah.
noticed that with wolves too, and so that's where I make the mistake. Like on an elk and a deer, like sometimes I shoulder pound. Like I just
Yeah.
and it cripples them. But if you try to shoulder pound a bear or even a wolf, sometimes it's either you're in the full mecca where all the arteries connect
Yeah.
and it's dead, or he's going to be
Yeah.
moving for a while.
I've always been taught with archery to go middle on bears because
Yeah.
those lungs are apparently, and still with guys, I'll say with rifle, drill him in the shoulder because I don't want him getting to the timber because if he gets in there, we're never going to find him. First one, smash the shoulder, drop him, and then but with archery tackle, yeah, I've always been told middle. I think because of exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
Those lungs tend to be a little, I wonder if that's a function of being a predator. I've never heard somebody say that's the same thing with wolves, but that's interesting to me that both of those would have lungs a little bit further back.
Well, if you see a wolf, like when you see a wolf sitting down or a wolf facing you, it almost looks like its shoulders are touching.
Right.
Like there's like no chest.
Yeah.
It's like its shoulders are super far forward. And if you look, and
right. Like it's not, like it doesn't have a rib cage in front. Like the whole rib cage is actually behind where the front shoulders come.
Exactly.
Together.
So like a deer and elk, they got the big chest, right?
Like a brisket. Yeah.
They got a brisket that's sitting there facing you. But a wolf, like its shoulders are really close together and it's super lean when they're staring right at you. Like I said, they're nearly touching. Like there's a crease pretty much
right
there at the chest. And so I've made the mistake last spring on a wolf, and it was like a pack I just finally got patterned, and I'm just like, and it took me a couple days, not too many days, just because I had snow and I was able to figure out their routes. And long story short, I caught up to him, had this wolf, and I barked at it to stop it, and it stopped broadside, pull up, and I shot, and like I said, instinctually, like a elk and mule, their shoulder pound, and it usually drops them. And I saw that wolf do this. I saw his tail do a big whirl, and it ran, and it ran hard like it hit. And I still think it died, just because there was one less wolf in the group,
okay.
After that day. And so for what I've recognized, I'm like, I think he died. But anyways, long story short, he went 400 yards, and then I stopped finding blood.
Yeah.
And I that's all I can go back to. I'm like, I remember. Sometimes we remember where the last place our crosshair is,
Yep.
Like those moments are embedded in my brain, and my crosshairs in my head were on the shoulder.
Yeah.
And that's all I can think of is I probably was too far forward with it. And maybe, but here's the thing too. He was coughing up blood. Like he would run about every 100 yards, and then it was just like mucus blood.
Huh.
That come out of his mouth. It wasn't coagulated blood. It was mucus blood. So it was coming from his nose and his mouth.
Yep.
And so he was dying internally. I just don't know if I did a whole lot of, as much damage as I was hoping for. I pulled the trigger. I thought I was just going to it was just slap right to the ground and see the feet kicking in the air. That's what I was expecting. When I saw him run, I was like, huh? And then when he's running, I'm like, oh, he'll tip over soon. And then he never did. I'm like, what's going on? What is happening here? And it all happened really fast. I didn't really have a lot of time to get another bullet in him. But yeah, predator versus prey, man.
They are different because it's funny. I've also seen more with bears than any other animal, them suck up, especially with rifles. Archery, not so much. When you get a pass through and an arrow, I find like bears they're not a very hard animal. Like they're kind of soft. They're pretty easy to get an arrow through. But I find with rifles, even the larger calibers, it's been amazing to me how like weird spots where they were suck up around, you'll get like the whole barrel roll thing, and then they're just gone. And you're like, if that was any other animal, like it's a 300 Win Mag, 200 grain bullet at like 180 yards, as long as you touched it's dead, or at least it's not going to get away and you're going to get another round in it. But they seem to have these, like, kind of magic spots where they can suck up a round. And maybe it is the hair. Like, you think you're getting more animal than you're not, and you just end up getting neck meat or fat or something like that. But I've seen that happen multiple times. And then, yeah, you'll follow the little speckled blood for 150 yards, and then it just dies up. It dries up. And you're like, I think that bear's fine. I don't know how, but I think he's just fine.
Yeah. And also too, like you said earlier, is they can roll in a hole and you'll never see it.
That's the thing.
Like an elk, they stick out, A
Totally.
deer even sticks out in some way, but like a bear or even a wolf, they'll just roll in some little hole, any divot in the ground, and you'll never
I think
find.
it's also the denning nature. Like, I don't think elk and deer are trying to find like a dark little hole and curl up in a little ball. Whereas
Yeah,
for a bear, I think when they get that sense of injury, or they're
yeah,
looking for that sense of safety, they're trying to find like a little place to curl up in, and it just makes it worse. But
yeah, it's
yeah,
true.
they're fun to hunt, man. It's something that's been cool to watch too in the hunting industry, like the popularity of bear hunting increase. Like that would be interesting. I'd like to hear that from your perspective, seeing as you come from a hunting family, you've been hunting your whole life. Have you really actually noticed a big difference in your area in the amount of interest in bear hunting?
I think just predator hunting in general,
Right.
just because of what predators have done to our area, and
Yeah.
it's been very obvious. And I'm not just throwing the bears. Bears are big calf killers,
Yep.
100%. And then we got wolves, which are probably, I'd say, out of any predator, they're and them and mountain lions are at the top. They kill more game than most, but bears, spring bears especially, we've watched them, on hillsides chasing around calf elk, and in a couple situations we've shot bears off of elk,
Right.
off of calves. And so one we do have a YouTube video of one where it was our friend. We brought a friend of ours hunting, and my brother Travis and him were glassing that bear. They were doing, like, you'd see the cow elk chase the bear, and then you'd see the vice versa. But you could tell that bear was looking for something, right? By the time they got up there and shot the bear, there's the calf elk was right there, fresh, dead, and it was good. That video was really good just because it shows people, look, this is why we do it, and Travis had an opportunity there in that video to explain the importance of predator management.
Yeah.
I'm thinking it is more popular. We're getting more non-residents that are coming up to hunt bears, and I think a lot of it is opportunity. I also think sometimes people watch our videos and like, oh yeah, I want a bear too.
Yep.
And it's actually getting too competitive where I'm like, hey, you don't have to drive that far to find a bear. Like, there's a lot of really good country between your home and where we live.
Right.
But people feel like they have to come exactly, to come up exactly where we hunt, exactly in the same unit. It's like, you don't have to do that. And I don't care, just it's a bear, And
Yeah.
so I'm like, I'm not like as secretive about bears as like hunting spots versus deer and elk. But at the same time, I'm like, yeah, you don't have to make this long of a drive, buddy. Like, there's bears all over Idaho. You can go to South Idaho, a lot of bears. North Idaho, lots of bears. And for me, and it's just my logic in hunting is always, I like to get away from people.
Right.
And I've always told people, if you're following people, you're going to get people, right? Oh, this guy shot a bear here. This is supposed to be a good bear spot. Therefore, I'm going to kill a bear. No, you know what you're going to get? You're going to get other people that were told the same exact thing. So that's that hype that that comes with it, unfortunately, with all hunting. For me, I like to go to the places where there's no hype, where you can't find it on a forum, where no one even talks about it. Or in fact, there's some places where people are like, this spot sucks. Like, I don't even go in there. And it's like, maybe I'll check it out. I don't know.
No, I like it, man.
Yeah.
There's an expression up here: "Don't hunt dead sheep,"
Mhm.
because that's everybody. Where'd you get your
Yeah.
sheep? That's the whole. And like sheep hunters, notoriously are the most secretive people on the planet. That's the other thing I like about the bears. I'm glad you mentioned that because I do film all my hunts. Is like it's not as much stress with the bear. If I leave a little peek in, if I leave a bit of a road in, it's like, listen, go nuts. You know what I mean? Like it's go ahead, go back to that cut black and cut block. But that's the other hard part is that people will hit me up for some bear spots. I'm like, I don't know, man, a cut block? Like I feel like there are less constraining factors to where you're going to find bears. So it actually, on one hand, makes it a bit more difficult because it can be overwhelming because you can literally find them from the bottom to the top, from left to the right. Like there's equal potential for bears to almost be anywhere.
Mhm. Yeah. And for me, especially when it comes to bear hunting, I think it's the older I get, when I was younger, I would just pound the mountain without thinking, just pound, pound, pound. I'll eventually fill my tag. And that's what I
Right.
did. And now I kind of use a little more wisdom. And I still hike, but I'm just like, I'll use the prime example of snow conditions, right? Like just based on the snow conditions, I'll know, hey, this is a good time of the year to go, or I'm not going to waste my time. I'm going to work for a couple more weeks, make some money. And then when we get a good 60 to 70-degree weather spell that comes through and that snow melts, we're going to get a wave of bears come out of the den. Then it's a good time to go out. You know what I mean? Same thing with just, we were talking about prime time. Sometimes it's better to go in the evenings. If it's a really hot, sunny day,
Yeah.
you got a bear that's been in the den all winter long. He's got that thick, thick coat. And as bad as he wants to eat, when it's a hot, sunny day, man, I tell you what, he does not want to be on that hillside.
No.
He does not. And so what you'll notice and what I've noticed is I will stay there, even to the last hour.
Yes.
And I still this is a funny story where this was a friend of mine that I grew up in the same area as him. And I was just by myself first, hiking into a spot to bear hunt. And it was prime time. I was like, I'm not going to waste any time. I'm going to just hunt prime time, because I had a lot of work projects going on. Well, this individual that I know, who I consider as a friend, he was leaving the mountain. He's like, "Oh, hey, Tom, you're hunting here too?" I'm like, "Yeah." Like, "Oh, we're leaving. We didn't see any bears." I'm like, "Okay." We walk past, and about 100 yards of walking, I see a bear and I shoot. And then he comes running back, like, and it's an old logging road. So he's running back
Yep.
this logging road. He's like, "I knew this was going to happen." I was like, "Why?" I was like, "Why were you guys leaving?"
Yeah.
Here's the funny thing too with bear hunting, and it's the same thing. I'll be driving up the mountain, right? Like in very popular bear hunt spots, and I'm driving past hunters. Hunters are leaving the mountain. They spent the entire day glassing. They didn't see a bear,
Yeah.
and now they're leaving. And guess what? I'm driving up the mountain the
Yeah.
last hour before dark because that's when all the action
100%. Dude, you
yeah.
nailed it. So my buddy outfitting 18 years, as long as there's somewhat decent action, no one leaves the house until 3:30. And he'll
Mhm.
have pushback because like guys want to grind. And he's like, I'm telling you, just chill out. This is not that hunt. This is not the go work for 18 hours. Yes, if it's slower, they're going to go do like a midday shift and then an afternoon shift. But on a regular week up there, nobody leaves the house until 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And he takes it one step further. He goes, I think you might even see some smaller bears out there, but while you're out chasing them, you're going to blow out the spots. And then the big guy who was going to come out an hour before dark is now not going to come out. I think that last hours, especially so where I was, I could shoot right up till 10 o'clock at night. It was pretty far north. And that 9 to 10 was money. Like I'm kind of waiting all day for that like dusk kind of last 2, 3, 4 hour stretch of the day. It's the best, hands down.
Yeah. And the only time I will really hunt midday is if we get like a cold spell or like get some rains throughout the day.
Yes.
And then it's like, okay, like this is a good time. Because I would prefer to have a bear spotted early in the day so you have time to make the stock.
Yep.
Otherwise, it's a rush, right? So you're sitting,
100%.
and it's like I was telling you, Travis, my brother, he always takes the initiative to pack the bow, but it'll be a bear and it's across the canyon. He's like, we have to get there. We have like less than an hour to get over there, and we are running. like not hiking, we're running, we're dropping gear, and it's like we got to get to that bear before dark. And most of those archery, any of those archery videos I capture my brother archering a bear are right at dusk. Like you can hardly see the bear in the video. It's still like it's like 10 minutes before dark, like before shooting hours, right?
Yeah.
Or so sitting there and it's like, and you're like, and it's still clear where I can see, but it's just not quite enough for the video camera. So you just see an outline of a bear.
Yeah.
But I always feel like it's always at a rush,
Yeah.
when you do that. But yeah, so I mean, yeah, so I guess kind of what I was saying though is, I use my time wisely, and you mentioned it as well. Like, for me, like I said, it's just like, especially with bears, I've killed plenty of them, and so it's not worth taking a long time of
Yes.
work off. Like I have a lot of work to do, and the more I work now, the more time I get to spend hunting mule deer, elk, moose, everything else in the fall. And so in the springtime, I'm just like, I'm thirst. I, I'm back thirsty to kill something, I don't want to say I'm bloodthirsty, but I kind of
Yep.
am. It's like,
Totally.
since I killed something, it's
Yep.
been, a couple months. And so springtime's a great time to break in the gun again, and get a bear. So, yeah, no, I like it. It's fun. And, I do enjoy with bears. I just love spring,
Yeah.
I
Getting
feel like,
back out. It's funny thing you mentioned it too. It's the only hunt that I can relax on. Like when
mm,
I hit day 6 or 7 on a mule deer hunt or an elk hunt and there's not something dead on the ground, I try not to let it become too overwhelming and ruin it for me. But like, if I'm honest, I start spinning, like I get really stressed out. It's like every second I got to be doing something. And it's like, it becomes like pretty anxiety filled last few days. Bears, not like that. Like, I go home empty. I go home empty. I find it a lot easier. And I still want to kill I still haven't broke 7 foot. So I still have like bear goals for sure. But I find it much easier to just chill out and enjoy the hunt than I do with some of those other animals that have horns.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I still get pretty excited on a big bear too. Yeah,
Oh,
but our bears don't get that big for some reason. Like I killed you were talking about age. I shot a 15-year-old bear a couple years ago, and he was about 6'3".
okay.
And you hardly ever hear a bear, at least in our area, break 6'5" or even that 7
Yeah.
mark. They just kind of they're short, but then they get stocky, and then obviously they get the big pumpkin head.
Yeah.
Um, but
What kind of skulls do you see? Like, what would be a big skull where you are?
man, I'm not great at aging.
Yeah.
Sorry, not aging, but
Like
the
scoring the skulls.
I
Yeah.
don't like. I'm very focused with elk and mule deer scoring, but bear scoring on the skulls.
Yeah.
I, yeah, I don't
I've
focus
just
on
seen
it.
that very regionally dependent as well. Like I got a buddy who outfits in northern Alberta, and that guy kills like 7 footers all day long. They'll be like 375, 400 pound bears, and he'll get 22-inch skulls all day. But even when you kill some of the giants on Vancouver Island, like breaking a 20 or 21 is hard. I think my buddy in northern BC that I was just hanging out with, I think he's only broke 21 a couple times. Like a 19-inch skull
Mm.
would be considered like a very big skull for like a BC bear, even if you're like getting over that 6.5 foot. So I do find it, and I don't know if it's diet. That's why everybody wants to go to Saskatchewan. Plus, you can bait them, but like you're
Yeah.
going to shoot that 400 or 500. That's the other thing. Our bears don't get big like the Alberta Saskatchewan bears. Like even a 7 footer might only be like a 300, 325 pound bear. Like that would be an average bear to see in the spring. You shoot a 7 foot bear in Alberta or Saskatchewan, that thing's probably pushing 400 or 500 pounds. Like it's a
Wow.
gigantic, just a mammoth, almost grizzly looking, type of thing. And we just don't get bears. We'll get the length, I guess, but they just don't get as thick. So I don't. Yeah, I guess it's just the same as we see the same stuff in mule, in deer and elk. Like our elk are not rack wise. Like, listen, there have been big elk shot in British Columbia, but just on a whole, the rack size of elk is nowhere near the rack size of elk in as like a Wyoming or Colorado or something like that. I think our bodies are significantly bigger. Like when I look at the elk I've shot here compared to when I've look at the elk that I've shot in the lower 48, like I get way more meat off of a BC elk, but the rack will be significantly smaller. But again, people are going to get pissed off at me because people do kill big elk. Like you'll hear about 360s and 370s kind of getting taken, a handful every year, but it's not like it is down south where you see people killing like 3s and 320s all the time. Like, no, they're like 240s, 250s is like a really good looking BC elk.
Yeah, I know what you're saying, because we have that too. Like
Right.
our family, I'd say like we've killed very few 340, 360-inch bulls.
Yeah.
And they're like, definitely like memories but I think probably the best way, sorry, and I'm kind of stumbling here, but if you were to talk to any people in our area, it's like if you kill a 340 bull, you're the talk of the town for 5 years.
Yep.
Or a 350 bull. So they exist. My brother's killed a 360 out of here, but like I said, like people still talk about that. And that was several years ago.
Yeah.
There was a 16-year-old girl who shot a 380 bull. Oh, was that 5 or 6 years ago? Had to be 5 or 6 years ago. But again, it's like, it's just so few and far between. But you're going to be looking at more like 300-inch bulls. The bull I killed last year, I aged him at age 8. I sent that lower tooth into the lab, and he was a 3. If he didn't break his points, he would have been a 325-inch bull.
Right.
Elk, and they get mass.
Yep.
They'll grow points, but they just don't get those beams, like you said, like those sagebrush bulls. And then on the other hand, I did a hunt with my little brother last year. We were talking about Wyoming. He drew a Wyoming tag, went down there. We were seeing 360, 370 bulls every single day.
Yep.
Every single day we were seeing those. It's like, man, I could take a couple years to actually get an eye on a bull that big. And here we are seeing it every single day. And even, we saw one that could have been, it's hard because I don't spend a lot of time with 380, 390 class bulls.
Yeah. Once they get over a certain size, to me, I'm just like a holy shit bull. Like I'm just like, I don't know, man. Like that's a big bull.
Yeah. And so you just have beams, like 60-inch beam. There was a bull we saw, it was like 60-inch beams, and all those points were over 20 from the bottom all the way to the saber tine. And it's just like, I can't even realistically tell you how big that bull is, but it would be great if we can kill him. And we'll figure it out when he's dead.
Yeah, exactly. I drew Wyoming this year, actually.
Oh, nice.
And a buddy of mine which takes 6 points now on the regular draw. Like when I first went to Wyoming, it would have been 2017.
So you're a Canadian resident, right?
Yeah.
So what's the rules for?
Same as you, man. If you're a non-resident of a state, they don't care where you live. You could live in Uzbekistan.
That makes me, well, I can't hunt Canada.
Tell me about it. Yeah. I feel bad sometimes. Like I never complain about, I'm like, you want to charge me $1,000 for your elk tag? Charge me $1,000 for your elk tag, because you can't even come to my province. You know what I mean? Like I'm the last guy in the world to complain about out of state hunting opportunities. Like I always do my best to be as appreciative as possible, because here's the crazy part. I can't even go hunt the other provinces.
Yeah.
I can't. I can get hosted in some of them, but there's some like the Yukon. I can't, the Northwest Territory, never. Like most of those people will only be given a special guide permit once every 3 years. Sometimes you can only bring in next of kin. But as a Canadian, I can't hunt other provinces unaccompanied by, without a resident of that province. Now, the only exception for me is Alaska, because it's something alien, like a non-registered alien or something. Because I'm not a citizen of the United States of America, I am not allowed to DIY hunt anything in Alaska. I have to go guided or not at all.
Okay.
Which is kind of,
Alaska is a little harder. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cause I bumped into an elk hunter from Australia, and I'm like, Australia. And he's like, yeah, we just bought the tags over the counter. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
What?
I mean, that's kind of what makes you guys so great. And then also, like, it's a bit of a pain in the ass, because anybody can, but I mean, when you guys say public land, you're not messing around. It's like public for everybody.
Yeah. Like, it's public for everybody for sure. And I still, I can still find those places where, where nobody else hikes. And we were talking
Yep.
about hike too. There's a lot of places that I hunt elk where it's not obvious on Google Earth. And I think that's the hardest part, is watching some really good areas that we work really hard to find
Yeah.
long before Google Earth, long before Onyx and these online maps. And then all of a sudden, like, there's a place, I kid you not, we had this place to ourselves for about 6 years. And we were pulling a bull elk out of there every single year, packing it with our horses and mules. And then we pull an elk out, and we never saw a soul for 6 years. Now I was like, well, here's last year. I was back there. I see some guy hiking back there. I'm like, oh, how did you find this place? He's like, oh, honestly, I'm from Texas and I saw this on Google Earth and it looked good. And I'm like, how in the world did you find, like, it was just, I was
Yeah.
so mind blown that this individual found this place. You know, it was hard enough for a local to find it, yet here's a guy from Texas just because he had Google Earth. And yeah, it does look great on Google. So you look at it, I'm like, crap, it does look good.
Yeah.
But I have those holes still, and it's actually exactly where my brother killed this 360 bull. If you looked at that on Google Earth, nothing special about it.
Right.
You couldn't, it's so brushy. You can't see the wallows from the air. You can't see the trail systems. It looks like a brush hole. There's nothing special about it. But because I've been there, you know, and spent years in there, I know the routes they take. And so, and that's a spot I can still, to this day, I can walk in there and I'm the only boot tracks in. I'll set a trail camera and not a single soul will walk past my trail camera besides animals, grizzlies, wolves, lynx, a little bit of everything, you know?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, those places are still out there. And, yeah, I do enjoy living in Idaho, you know, and the things that we have here. Although I will say this, there's parts of me where I'm just like, it'd be nice to be a Canadian resident, you know, but you got to get that Trudeau guy out.
Dude,
Like,
don't even, you're preaching to the choir, man.
I won't step foot.
Yeah, I don't blame you. 10 years ago, I would have went toe to toe even with an American that I lived in the best country on earth. Like, I
Yeah.
firmly believed, I was proud of my country. I loved my country. It was like, it stood for everything I believed in. Like, even when we did have, you know, the odd liberal leader, even then, back then, like that version of liberal, I'm like, I can live with this. Not my ideal, but I can live with it. And then what a single individual has been able to do to this country in the last 6 or 7 years, like, I don't think you could have drove it into the ground any harder if you'd like written out a game plan to just destroy a country. Like, it's been how you can screw this place up. Like, we got more land than anybody, more natural resources than anybody, fewer people than anybody. Like, I don't know what else you could possibly, it's paradise.
Yeah.
And still, debt goes up, jobs go down, interest rates up, house sales down. Like, by every metric you can choose, my country's getting driven into the ground. And the only upside, he's not going to make it. He has record low favorability ratings, and there's a pretty charismatic conservative leader, Pierre Polyev.
Yeah, I've been following him. I really like the stuff that he says.
Yeah.
You know, and so
yeah, and I think he's got enough momentum behind him that I think come this next election we got coming up, I think we'll see a major.
And when's your guys' election?
Oh, this is funny. Well, here's the other thing. We don't actually get to vote for the prime minister. So this is the other thing a lot of people don't know about Canada. I can vote locally, but I don't get to vote nationally. So it's just based on, it's like representative. So we call them MPs here, members of parliament, but however many of those locally, they amass those, and then that's who gets the seat. So it's funny because maybe I don't like my conservative local leader. Maybe locally I have slightly more liberal politics than I do federally. We don't get to make that choice. You only get to vote once, and then it gets added up.
Gotcha.
But yeah, it's coming up, but I don't know exactly when.
Yeah. Well, I've done a lot of hiking in Canada, and I've shed hunted it, and man, I love the country up. I love British Columbia. That's 20 minutes from my house. It's right there, but it's just,
I didn't know you were that far north. No shit.
I'm pretty far north.
Okay.
But yeah, so the mountains, yeah. I mean, the mountain
Yeah.
ranges, I share these same mountain ranges
Yep.
with Canada, you
Yep.
know, and um, so it's hard for me because I'm like, man,
I
because if
know,
I go to the other side, we're talking about getting away from people. I can get away from people on the other side of the line,
bro. Yes, you
and
can.
I'm just like, gosh, this is my paradise here.
Yeah.
That's like, okay, so what do I have to deal with? Okay, we have to deal with all these gun laws. I have to deal with
Yep.
this. And then I'm like, and then I start all of a sudden start waving my American flag again. I'm like, never mind, I'll just stay
Yeah.
here.
I just wish we could host you guys. Like, okay, fair
Yes,
enough.
that'd be
Maybe
great.
maybe we don't open it wide open, but at least I wish, because that would keep a cap on it. Like, how many people are you actually going to bring over? Let somebody bring one person a year type of thing. Um, because I start having so many friends now, from south of the border and even north of the border. Like, I've been chatting with Adam for quite some time now. I would love to be able to, like, Adam, come on down. Let's go chase something in BC. And the only way we can do that is if you had any more sisters, because
Yeah,
you can do next of kin. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
immediate family, if they're an American resident, you can host them. But like, I don't even think you can go as far out as cousin. Like, it has to be
yeah.
legitimate, like one step away. But yeah, it's unfortunate, man, because the other thing that it leads us to is we don't manage our wildlife nearly as professionally. Like, that's what blew me away. And for the first part of my hunting career, so I've only really seriously been hunting for the last 8 years. I had a little bit of I'm 45. I had a little bit of hunting, moose hunting when I grew up. Like, it was a big deal on my dad's side of the family, that like one big moose hunt every year, wall tent at the end of a logging road, like pretty classic Northern Ontario style of hunting. And I did that twice with them when I was 12 and 13. And then I had a falling out with my old man. Didn't speak to those guys for 10 years, went off and did a bunch of other shit. And then in my mid 30s, I kind of found hunting again. And I'd been a forestry engineer for 15 years. So getting around in the mountains of British Columbia was my bread and butter. And then all of a sudden, I just had to figure out how to actually find animals. But now I forget where I was even going with that point. Anyways, there was a point somewhere in there. It just
I'm
just
trying to think.
escaped me. Yeah,
Yeah.
were we talking? We're having people.
Oh yeah, the
Oh,
first
when I
and
first started hunting, I actually did more hunting in the States than I did in Canada, because getting information about where to hunt in the States was easier than figuring out spots in Canada. Like, we don't, all that data you guys have access to based on unit, like harvest success rates and the amount of 4 points that were taken and the days in field per hunter, per animal, like none of that stuff exists in Canada. So, and like you said about the wilderness, the problem with BC is it's overwhelming. Like, I don't even know, when you get into hunting in a place like BC, it's like, I don't know, man. Like, the whole, we call it crown land, not public land, but like 80% of the province is, you can literally go anywhere. Like, how do I even, and, but like Go Hunt had started in the States. And now the funny part is, I don't know why it does that stupid dumb thing. The funny thing is, all the tools that I used to use when I started, I don't use any of them anymore. Like, I was the guy reading the Go Hunt description thinking they were actually going to tell you like what unit was like the good unit. And then you realize like everybody's reading the same shit. So if
yeah,
they
you
put some
follow
good stuff in
people,
this,
you follow people, you'll get people.
yeah,
Yeah.
100%. But it was almost like this red herring, which is what kind of drew me. Also, the other cool thing about the States that I think is a red herring, and I've come full circle on this. When I first started hunting, I was just like, oh, I want those premium tags, because you think that it's like your golden ticket to Willy Wonka's factory. Like, if I can just pull one of those premium mule deer tags in Colorado or a premium elk tag in New Mexico, like as a newer hunter, that's what's going to unlock success for me. And the longer I hunt, the more I realize the real holy grail is like, where can you go get a tag every single year? Like, where can you learn where those little spots are and get to know it and have a chance to go in there with a tag in your pocket pocket every single year. Like, I'm not saying still don't go for the lottery tickets. I drew Unit 36 in New Mexico. I had the craziest elk hunt of my life, screaming bulls every day. It was amazing. But I don't think that's what you're going to build routine success off of. And that's what it took 5-6 years of kind of flailing around to actually figure out. And it was like you talking about those smaller spots earlier. Like, there's no free lunch in hunting. What I realize now is it's just time dedicated to spots and like grinding it out, looking for those like the little corridors and little spots. So I just went hunting with this guy here, Steve Isdall. He's like a blacktail wizard. He's on Instagram as Pro Guide 66. As far as Pacific blacktail goes, like nobody can touch this guy. And he's somebody I've watched for years. And being over there and hunting with him for a week and hearing him talk about how small some of the pockets, his blacktail pockets are, it's like he could point right at the hill and say like, that's where I'm hunting blacktail. And I could stumble around in there for a season or two and not kill a blacktail because they're holed up in such little pockets. And the only way you figure that out is with time, running many cams over many years, hiking in at different seasons, especially, you're in the same situation. Like once that snow falls, like that's just information you're not, especially with animals like blacktail that don't leave the same kind of beat up tracks that like a mule deer or an elk does, and there's no replacement. And that's what I thought. I thought there were shortcuts earlier on that I'd be able to hack it or I'd be able to like, figure something out that would put me ahead of the pack. And I realized after years, there's no replacement for just boots on the ground, figure out your local areas. And that's the other thing we have going for us here that you guys have going for you too, is you can put a mule deer and an elk tag, a mule deer, an elk, and a bear tag in your pocket every single year as a resident in Idaho and get to know those local areas.
Exactly. Yeah. And our muleys, I do follow that guy that you were talking about. He's a really cool guy. And I know I love watching those. You could tell like those big blacktails. You can see they're old, mature bucks, and it gives me a little bit. Our muleys are kind of interesting. They actually, I don't want to say they remind me of a blacktail, but they're very similar. Like they have a very black coat. If I hunt muleys in the sagebrush country versus where I live, they're a different muley.
Yeah,
like they got a darker coat. Sometimes they'll even double throat patch. And I mean, beautiful, beautiful coats. And then they get their racks. We don't get 30-inch wide muleys. I
was going to say the same thing up here. Like they almost look more like a blacktail. And our tag, the funny thing is here, our tag is the same. You get, I forget what it even says on it, if it says mule deer or blacktail, but it's the same tag up here because it's just an imaginary line that's cutting them off. But even our big mule deer that I see people get up in BC, especially if they're those timber bucks, they're like a tighter rack. It's like a heavier mass. They tend to have a darker color. And they're not throwing those crazy, 30, 32-inch wide, racks that you see in that open country when you get south of us.
Yeah. But and anytime somebody walks in, we have a trophy room, and anytime somebody walks that trophy room, they always point at a buck that I've killed. And they're like, tell me a story of that buck. And it's an 18-inch wide muley. 18-inch wide, and it grows like a tree trunk, just like grows straight up, and then it's just trash.
Yeah.
It just goes straight up. And I remember when I rattled that buck in, and when he came into my rattle, at first glance with the naked eye at 100 yards, I'm like, oh, he's all right. I pull up my scope, I'm like, I better be shooting. And then I pulled the trigger, and it was steep. He rolled up down a long ways, and so I just had to follow. There was just a skip of snow, and I could just follow this slide. And thank goodness there's a little brush patch not even brush patch, it was a timber patch that held him. And but he was kind of a cool buck. But that we do get that as well. The buck I shot last year, he's probably 24 wide, and I got him aged. I think he was 8 too.
Yeah, that's an old buck, man.
Yeah, old buck, and I had sheds to him, and I called him in too as well. He was 50 yards. I called in his doe, and she came in point blank. She came in about 5 or 6 yards right to me, and I saw him following her behind her, and I had the rifle in hand. I'm just like, here he comes. But then he froze at about 50 and just, got eyes on me, and I'm like, I better shoot. And
Yeah.
I had to give him had to freehand him. And so, but yeah, it's the timber pounding is really fun. And the one thing about it is I feel like I've done really well with it. I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but I've done really well with the timber pounding with muleys and elk.
Right.
And people that have lived here their whole lives are still asking me to this day, how do you do it? Because it is very challenging.
Yeah.
And when anytime I see a non-resident come up, it's like, I'm going to hunt muleys. I'm like, good luck.
Yeah.
It's like you're talking about what's his Instagram pro
Pro
guy.
Guide 66. Yeah.
Yeah. Like it's like that guy. It's like imagine a non-resident showing up. Yeah, I'm going to hunt blacktails. It's like,
Yeah. Oh, they are
oh,
widely
okay.
regarded as like one of the most annoying creatures on the planet to hunt. But I want to ask you a question before it slips my mind, because we use a ton of those same calling tactics on blacktail. And I don't hear a lot of, I hear people talking and rattling in whitetail, but I don't hear a lot of people talk about calling, whether it be does or I've killed blacktail with the little Primos doe can. The thing came in on a rope, man. Like, I could have taken him with a bow. It was like a 70-yard shot. That was my first solo blacktail. And that was straight off Steve's little how to hunt videos. And I would be interested to know, like, do you think that's like a timber thing or a Pacific Northwest thing too, where the calling does tend to be like a much more successful tactic with those bucks in this region than I don't hear people talking about doing that south of us or in the bigger expanses where it's like, or is glassing just so successful they don't need to? I'd be interested in your thoughts on that. Yeah.
That's what I think. I think because I hunt I've traveled to Southern Idaho. I've hunted Colorado and stuff, and these guys they don't know how to hunt timber,
Right.
and that's where I do my best work. Like I've done this for so long, I almost feel too comfortable with the timber,
Right.
and I think they all call. Believe it or not, I believe they all call. I've called in bucks in sagebrush country, but they have to be close. They have to actually be able to hear my call.
Right.
And a lot of guys, they don't even, when in that open country, because I have this conversation with a lot of people, they're not even looking at the tracks in the snow. They're not, there's a lot of things they're missing in their routes that they're taking and all that. And when you're hunting timber, you're analyzing sign a lot. And even with or without snow, you have to look at tracks. You have to look at well-used trails, systems. You have to look at rubs. And I'm not just talking about any old rub. I'm talking about rut rubs, like rubs that like there's a buck actually making a route through here. And he does this route often. He's out here to search for does. There's these additional things you have to be observant that you just kind of take for granted, I guess, in your open country. You're just focusing in the glass. You find a nice muley buck, and you shoot it, but you're not actually calling in deer. There's a lot you're missing, I guess you could say. And I'll use the example too of this Colorado hunt I went on. Is I killed this really big buck. He was scored 193. And I bumped into, it's a very easy tag to get. So I bumped into a lot of other hunters too. And a few of them actually knew our YouTube channel. They're like, oh yeah, Stock and Rod, I love your videos, and I kept tabs with them. I'm like, I want to see how your guys' success is, right? Like I want to keep tabs with you guys. And I kept track with 5 different parties of hunters, 5 different parties. Not one single one came out with like a half decent buck in that unit. And I asked them, every single one of them, like, what happened? And it's the same story as I always hear, is after the first couple days of hunting season, doesn't matter if it's muleys, it doesn't matter if it's elk, they all hit the timber. As soon as the gunshots are going off, they go to the timber. And I'm just like, and these guys were like, they just stopped showing out in the openings. And I'm like, well, did you try the timber? And every single one of them just like, no. Like, was I supposed to? Yeah. Where do you think they go? They're in the timber. And for me and where I live, our mountains are 80, it's probably 85, even 90% timber.
Yep.
And so,
It's a carpet. I don't think people understand that from
yeah,
the South. Like, I was saying that to somebody I was hunting with this because you always hear about, like, forestry and the greenies and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, I would like to see you like stop trees from growing here. Like, I
yeah,
I would love there to be a square inch that wasn't completely covered in timber because at least I could see what is going on. It is literally an ocean of timber. And if it's not like a swamp or some other air or a rock face, there's trees and green on it.
yeah, exactly. And that's kind of where we're at too. Just, we have trees growing on north and south facing
Yep.
slopes. I'm logging right now as I speak. I'm on a logging job right now, and I'm working on that. And I mean, man, don't even get me started on all the species that have been cutting on that. There's a lot
Yeah.
of timber on there. And some of my dad's properties, he's logged his own property 6 times.
Yeah.
It just, they keep growing.
Yep.
What's funny about trees? They grow back.
Yep. Every
And
time, man.
yeah, and obviously even better on the coast. When you get the coast,
Oh,
you're doing
that's
those.
where I started doing layout was Vancouver Island.
Was it
And
okay?
like, oh, dude,
Big
we're
timber.
bringing hemlock in like 30, 40 years. Like fir grows like a weed. Like, and
Yeah.
that was the other thing where I really started to give my head a shake because everybody's talking about old growth. And don't get me wrong, there are like, we have this one area called the Carmana Valley. Like, there's a couple real special areas of old growth that I fully support. Just don't go in there because I want for future generations to be able to walk around in those giant cedars and spruces and see like this is what happens unmolested because it's crazy and you've never seen anything. It's like going to the redwoods in California or something. It's like
Yeah.
one of the wonders of the world. But where I was used to going into old growth on North Vancouver Island, it's like there's nobody there. There's nobody hiking. There's nobody backpacking. It's like it is a wall of timber and salal and bullshit. Like it's like one of the most unpleasant places on earth. It's not pretty. All the trees are all gnarled and it's like it's funny. I hear people saying to protect stuff, and I'm like, but for what? You're not. You want us to go in there. You need those logging roads to open up those areas to recreational possibilities. Because if they don't, it's just impenetrable forest. Like you're never going to be able to use it for anything, anyways.
And for us, it creates habitat. When we
Right.
log, so this is when I was a kid, we had 18 running mills here.
Okay.
18 mills, and my dad was this is back when like logging was booming, right?
Yeah.
And so this is where my dad made his money, was back in those days. And so that was his oil field, I guess you could say, where
Yeah.
he raked it. And man, it's just crazy to think of actually like the amount of game in the late 1990s that we had. And it was because we were managing our forest, and cutting those trees. There's a lot of vegetation that can't grow. It can't get
100%.
sunlight. As soon as you space out them trees, and that's what I'm doing right now. We're doing selective logging where we're spacing the trees out. It actually doesn't even look like it's logged.
Right.
And I'm going behind her with a grinder, with a mulcher, and it just looks like a park. The trees are all spaced out between, and these are merchable trees.
Yep.
But I'm spacing them out like 15 to 20 feet.
Yeah.
And it's like, and we're pulling a couple truckloads an acre, and you wouldn't know that we're doing that. You know what I mean? Afterwards, like, is this a logging job? Yes. Like I logged it, and, but people think of logging, they think of mass destruction. They think animals are sitting there, I've died, and they don't realize that anytime like we get a big logging project on the mountainside, all of a sudden the wildlife populations increase in the next 5 years. It's the same thing like a burn. You get a big burn that runs through,
100%.
and you'll get like our muley numbers jump up, our elk numbers jump up, everything jumps up in those areas. That old growth timber, for me, I find bigger bucks there just because it's just people don't think to hunt those places, right?
Yeah.
So
and the access is tougher because they're not going to have roads into it. And
Yes.
it's going to be, see, this is what most people don't understand about British Columbia because they see this like untouched wilderness. And I'm like, yeah, it's great. but our population densities are nowhere near. Like, I think we have two main elk herds. Like, there's a couple of little pockets, and I think one
Yeah.
estimate is around 30,000, the other estimate is around 40,000. Like, that doesn't even put us in contention with one of the states, and we're like geographically 10 times the land mass of like a Colorado or something like that. But it's due to the unbroken nature of most of the wilderness that the populations are so low. So it's like, on one hand, yeah, you can go have that 12-day crazy stone sheep hunt, but I mean, like, I've gone on a literally 13-day solo stone sheep hunt, and I can count the number of animals I've seen on both my hands. And,
Yeah.
and I didn't run into another single living person because of that very fact, the untouched nature of the wilderness, and the fact that there's no edge habitat and there's no broken up, nature to the forest. Our population densities are just nowhere near what they are south of the border.
Yeah, because most of the states, like you said, are they're pretty much man-made ecosystems,
Yep.
but it's he's the I don't know his title, but he runs the F4WM Foundation for Wildlife Management, which is, it's, if those who don't know, that's our wolf reimbursement program that we have in Idaho.
Okay.
Anyone who kills a wolf and is member gets reimbursed for their expenses, and so it just helps manage wolves. Well, the one thing he mentioned and is about having maximum capacity in an area, right? And there's just a lot of dead country. If you're not managing forests, like, look at all that timber country that there's thousands of acres that never gets logged, and there's no browse,
Nope.
and there's no deer. There's deer can't live in that. Elk can't live in that.
Yeah.
You're going to have some squirrels, you're going to have some birds, but you're not going to have a lot of game. And so, for me, some of the best areas are areas where it's a little more checkerboard, where they log a section's timbered, they log a section.
Yes.
So they have the best of both worlds, where they have a place to feed and they have a place to bed down.
Yeah.
And, and I'm going back to the late 1990s and even the early 2000s. The early 2000s, when I started hunting, that's when I was old enough to hunt. And I feel like I got to experience the good old days from the time I was 12 years old to the time I pretty much hit 20. Those were the good days, like big bucks, big bulls. And I was still trying to figure out how to do it, so I've made a lot of mistakes around that time, and I had my fair share of opportunities that didn't present themselves. And now I feel like I'm more of an experienced hunter, and, it'll take me a full week to find a bugling elk. And I'm like, you know what? It's not like when I was younger, where it's like, if an elk didn't cooperate with me, then it's like, okay, well, this one's not cooperating, I'll go look for another one. It's like, no, I'm going to find out what clicks with this bull, because it's the only bull I've heard all week. Yeah. So I'm going to call this bull in. I don't care if it takes me 8 hours. I don't care if it takes me 2 days. I'm going to call this bull in, and I'm going to kill him. Yeah. This is the only bull I found. And so I've gained, and that's actually, in some way, it's taught me about becoming a better hunter too, because I felt like we had so much game back in the day, to where even guys that were killing elk every single year weren't really skilled elk hunters. They were just hard. They were hardworking individuals.
Yeah.
So they hunted as hard as they worked, and those were the guys that were successful. But those guys now are not successful, because that's all they know. All they knew to do was hike. I know if I can hike, then I'll kill an elk. And it's like, now it's like, you can't just hike and kill an elk. You have to know it. Yeah. You have to have the work. I mean, you have to have that drive, but you also have to have the knowledge and elk behavior. And thank goodness that I've had years of experience with it, to where I'm not just hunting them. I'm looking for their sheds. I have trail cameras. And even if I don't set trail cameras out, like, I spent enough time around them to where I still know their routes. Right. And then when I have to go on a trip, let's say I'm mule deer or elk hunt and I have to go to Wyoming, it's different terrain, but it's honestly the same animal.
Right.
It's the same animal, but they've adapted to their area, to their landscape differently. And so that's where I've come to realize, like with elk and deer, like, I tried to say that before with muleys. I'm like, I used to think the Southern Idaho Muley was different than the North Idaho Muley. And I've realized it's the same muley. I mean, they just evolution took over a little bit to where their fur is different, right? I've used the example of like sagebrush. Those muleys down there are the color of sagebrush to protect them from predators.
Sure.
Up here, we don't have sagebrush, so over time, our muleys tend to be darker.
Yep.
They're in that dark timber, so they're dark. They're a darker animal, but if you were to put a muley in North Idaho and you put it in Southern Idaho, he's eventually going to evolve into living like a muley in Southern Idaho.
See, and I think one of the interesting things, I think the tactics, because this is one of the frustrating things as a BC resident, and like most of my channel following, whatever you want to call it, that doesn't make me sound like a douchebag, tend to be newer hunters. And the frustrating part for us in BC is that 90% of the content that is generated is focused on more of that southern style of hunting. Like it's more open terrain. People tend to use the same type of like, and I don't want to throw him under the bus, but like Corey, I'm going to forget his name now. He's an Idaho guy, or was an Idaho guy. You know who I'm talking to. Corey Jacobson or Phelps. This like challenge bugle, location bugle based calling tactics, or spot and stalk mule deer, get to the highest spot, glass all day. And it doesn't work particularly well in BC. Predominantly because we don't have the terrain for the spot and stalk mule deer. Like you're just not going to get up and glass mule deer all day. And I don't want to use the excuse that like our bulls aren't vocal. But I've also seen people come up here who like slay down there and they don't do so well up here. Like it's like those tactics do not seem to be transferable. But I do agree that when you take, and again, I don't want to seem like super ethnocentric and say our stuff's harder, so we're better. I don't want to come off like that. But it does seem that if you cut your teeth and you're able to be routinely successful in the darker timber stuff and the stuff with more vegetation, you can go down there and those tactics will, because I think they're more behavior-based tactics as opposed to like terrain-based tactics.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to be adaptable too. And, and I've actually learned this from my brother. My brother's naturally an adaptable individual. Like he doesn't have to think about it. Like,
right.
And I'm gonna actually really boost my brother up right now, Travis, because he, it's like hunting elk, for example. Like for me, I'm a routine guy, and I think most hunters are. And so in my teens, I go through a routine, right? If it's sitting in my tree stand, or if I would, and I'd be after bull elk, I'd walk the same trail, I'd bugle the same area, and I just hope that eventually that big bull is going to come out and reveal himself. My brother was the opposite, where it's like, okay, well, he's not here, so I got to go here. Oh, he's not here, I got to go here. And then if this doesn't work, if this call doesn't work, this tactic doesn't work, then I'm going to try a different tactic. Travis has always been like that. And over time, I've now developed the same tactic my brother has, where, when you go to Southern Idaho and you're hunting muleys, like my first instinct is not the timber pound. It is to glass out in the openings.
Yep.
But if you get that hunting pressure after the first couple of days and the animals timber up, you have to know, okay, you have to think, it's kind of cliche, but you have to think like the mule deer. Okay, well, they've been shot at, therefore they moved into places where they feel safer. And you drive, there's these guys and they drive their side-by-sides. If they can't glass from their side-by-side, they leave. Well, guess what? If you can get in those draws where the side-by-side can't see, all of a sudden it's just like after 3 or 4 days of the deer season, all of a sudden it's just stacked with deer.
Yeah.
If all these spots. But if you walk that road where the side-by-sides were, you won't see a single deer. It's just because they adapt, they figure things out. So you have to adapt with them. Same thing like elk too, right? Like you get in these areas where there's a lot of roads and a lot of trail systems, right? Well, this is something we've developed over time where there's these pockets roadless, and I don't even hit these areas until after the elk season kicks in. As soon as the elk season kicks in, these big bulls wrap into these roadless areas and they find these benches and they're just done from the rut. They're done from the rut. and they're sick and annoyed of the gunshots that are going on during the hunting season. And now you got mid-October post-rut bulls. They bed down in a spot where there's just no hunting pressure and there's no trail systems nearby. And so what we do, we go into those places after a couple weeks of rifle season. And then that's when we bump those big bulls in the post-rut. So for me as a hunter, and I know it's kind of goes full circle. You follow people, you get people. You follow animals, you get animals. I'm not sitting there on hunting forums and studying hunting forums, and I used to. So right from the beginning, I felt like they were really essential, but now everybody's doing it, right?
Yeah.
So now I'm going back to the animal. Like I'm not here to know what everybody else knows. I want to know what everybody else doesn't know.
Yeah.
Because then I end up having bulls and muley bucks to myself. Right now, I have a big monster muley that I found. It's public land. It's a general tag. You're saying you can buy this tag and hunt this fall. You could. And I have a buck that you wouldn't believe if I showed you photos. He's a tank and he's trash. He'd be a dream buck, right?
Yeah.
For 2 years now, I'm the only one that knows about this buck. And I have not bumped into a soul in there yet.
Yeah.
And again, one of those places you look on a map, you wouldn't even recognize it. It wouldn't stick out to you as a spot you'd want to go to, right? But it's roadless and it sucks walking in there. It sucks. But he's in there. And so I don't throw all my eggs in one basket. I'm still like if I go in there and I see a nice buck, I'm going to shoot it, but I'm in there specifically for him.
Right.
And I have multiple stories where when the big buck and big bull eventually dies, and I still tell the story of the bull I killed in 2019. I had 2 years of sheds to that bull. I've tried every call in the book. You can send those, what you would consider as those calling experts, those guys that could sit there and they get trophies for how good of a call they do. That will not work with this bull. This bull does not come into bugles. Like there's a reason why he's alive on a general tag.
Yep.
And he's survived wolves for 7 years. Well, actually I killed him. I'll have to remember. I don't remember how old he was, but I just know that I have 2 years of sheds to him. And he was a big 7x7 and he stopped growing. In fact, he declined the year I archered him. I stuck him with the bow. But going back to adapting, we found out that calls didn't work. So do we just keep calling every time we see him? No, we've already found out. We've tried cow calling him. We've tried bugling him in. Mostly it's just challenge bugles, trying to get him to pull away from his cows. None of those things worked. He'd always run. He'd always push his cows. If you pushed him too hard, he left his cows. He's like, see you later. Like this
Round
ain't
him
work.
up later.
Yeah. He'd disappear for a week and then he'd come back and have his cows again. I'd sit there and I'm like, there's his cows. Where'd he go? And then that bull also adapted to being in the open burn during the archery season so he can see archery hunters. And so it's a very timber mountain, but that one area was burnt, right? So he'd live in these rocks and as the bugles would happen, as all these archery hunters in the morning would get there and start bugling, he'd just stand up on that rock and look down that canyon, just like king of the mountain. And he was a very smart bull. So this is the way we had to figure it out. Like this is the way we did. And I did have help from my brother. He's like, and this is actually my brother's idea, so I'm going to give him credit for this too. He said, let's beat this bull at his own game, right? He's like, I'll be the caller. I'll call. And, if the bull comes into my call, I'll kill it, right? But he's like, if it doesn't come into my call and runs like it always does, you're ahead. And Travis I knew this bull's routes. I've watched this bull's routes several different times. He's like, you get ahead in the dark. And then when the sun rises, I'll bugle. And hopefully if that bull runs from me, it'll walk past you and you can archery it. And that's exactly what happened. Archered him at 55 yards. Travis bugled. That bull ran away from Travis, pushed his cows. Cows walked past me single file. And I archered him. And 2 years of trying to kill that bull, and he's finally dead. And I'll tell you what, if I went through the routine if I just listen to everybody, what everybody else said, yeah, you got to use this. Oh, it's just the way you're calling, you need to
Yeah.
challenge him in a little differently this time. No, he doesn't come in the calls. He's a visual bull. Like he wants to see something.
Yeah.
Like he's adapted to that. He's like, if I don't see something, something's not right.
Right.
I got to see an elk,
Yep. Yep.
And so he always put himself in that position. So I had to work a different tactic. I just simply, I wasn't going to call him in, to kill him. And it's the same thing with, same thing with muleys, if you, if you do too much of one thing, muleys are going to adapt too. I have so many people that say muley bucks are not smart, and yet they kill little bucks. And it's like, well, sure, you kill little bucks that are 2 or 3 years old.
Yeah.
They're not smart. They haven't been around the block. When you're pursuing a timber buck that's 8+ years old, he's been around the block. He's survived mountain lions, wolves, other hunters. There's a reason why he's still alive, and he's skittish like a whitetail,
Yeah.
you know. And
They're a
so
different species, man.
they do.
Like
Big
when they
bulls,
get
big bucks.
over a certain age, it's just like it's like you're hunting a different animal.
You are, and that's exactly what you are. They're going to act differently than the average muley,
Yeah.
or bull elk is going to act differently than the average bull elk, you know. And where I find big bull elk sheds, it's not where you expect it. It's not where all the feed is. It's where they feel safe.
Right.
They a big bull will sacrifice a food source for safety. And so like some of these places I'll find a big monster bull elk, I'm like, what are you eating on? They're nibbling on nothing. There's like little brush patches here and there. If you wrap around the south facing side, like brush fields as far as the eye can see, tons of cow elk, a lot of young bulls. That big bull won't touch it.
Right.
Why? Because the wolves run it. He's like, I know better. I'd like, yeah, I'd rather eat canned beans than go around that corner,
Yeah.
Like then eat the buffet, and always have to run from wolves, and you have to, there's like you said, it's a different animal. And that's just something that I've been really focusing on the past decade. And like I said, the proof's in the pudding. It's not just me, but my other brothers. And we're consistently putting big stuff on the ground. And a lot of that, like I said, it has to do with being, adapting, and also just learning everything about the animal. You talked earlier about browse for bears, like bear food source, right?
Yeah.
And that's another thing I keep tabs on. When people are asking me, oh, where do I kill bears? Can you give me a spot, location? It's like, well, what time of the year do you want to hunt that spot? Because if you hunt that too late, it's not good. That's so like I have spots that I'll hit first week of season, right when the snow first melts, the first green grass that grows.
Yeah.
That's where I go. That's where the bears are. They're going to the food, right?
See, and I think we actually missed that whole phase this year, because I normally see a bunch of bears hit the ground like within 2 to 3 weeks of opener, even like maybe as late as that first week of May. But just when that first kind of big thaw happens, and especially like I can tell you the curves in the logging roads where they're going to be, because it's where that thick green grass comes up first, or the railroad tracks, or the little avy shoots, like, and it concentrates those bears there. And this year, because that weird snowfall we all didn't have, that didn't exist. And everybody was like, oh, bear hunting is so hard this year. And I'm like, yeah, because you don't have anything concentrating that action on that green up that you would normally get.
It was like moose paddles too. Yeah. So bears, we're in the same boat. We got the same weather as you guys.
Yeah.
Thank goodness we did get a late March snow that saved us.
And we've been hammered by rain the last month and a half. So at least things are a little bit, wetter up there than they were. Cause it was like, I'm like, this place is going to burn down by June, man. Like this is insane.
Yeah. It was getting a little scary there. Yeah. No, we were in the same spot. So moose paddles, for example. So our moose, they're stubborn like a mule deer. Like It takes a lot of snow to pull them down. Muleys are the same way. It takes a lot of snow to pull them down. Elk and whitetails, opposite. Elk and whitetails tend to pull down with the snow a little bit better. Where I'm going with this, the moose paddles were scattered this year, like all over the mountainside. Usually they pull in these pockets. You can find a fair amount. And I just knew when to cut my losses. I was just like, you know what? This year's just not the year to find moose paddles. I ended up with 3 moose paddles, but probably burnt, $1,000 plus
Right.
snowmobile fuel, which I hardly, you know, with a lack of snow, it was like I should have just drove the 4-wheeler, like everything was just scattered,
Yeah.
and there's spots too. I just can't, I keep going back and I'm just like, I just need to stop. Like I knew there was a big bull moose in there and I keep going, but there was nothing to pull him in a spot. So you can see where all his rubs are, but he'd rub here and then he'd go a mile or so. And then he'd rub there and there's just no snow pulling him into these spots. And the same thing with bears, like you said, this year too. We didn't get that, like where that first green grass,
Yeah.
like you were saying. But we did. It just happened super early,
Yeah.
like,
And it was kind of everywhere all at once. And I don't think
yeah.
it concentrated them the same way that it typically does.
Yeah. So they were pretty scattered. I was actually seeing bears shed hunting. This was first week of April. I was seeing
Yeah.
bears and even I was seeing bears during bear season. I just wasn't in bear mode yet though. I was just like,
Yeah.
I'm looking for sheds and I'd see a black bear and I'm like, oh, you'd be so dead if I packed the gun, but I'm shed hunting today. You'll die another day.
Yeah. Well, that was like me. I didn't even bother. I was doing a bunch of cam setup. And partly because I knew I was headed up north and partly because I knew I was headed to the island, I didn't even take my gun with me the first 6 weeks I was setting up cams because I was like, I'll get to it kind of later, and had a few opportunities, but that's when I was picking up. I'm like, oh, these things are all over the place this year. Like,
Yeah.
yeah. Listen, man, I already burnt an hour and a half of your time. I didn't get
Yeah.
into any of the questions that I had. So
Yeah. Do you have any questions you want to whip out really quick?
yeah, you know what? I got a couple off of Instagram.
I didn't know if we, no, no, previously I was like, at first I was like, did we start recording yet?
I know.
But that's fun. It's fun to chat.
I've learned this now that I just hit record before you even come on, because otherwise I'll do that and the chat just bleeds into a podcast. But we'll do a round 2 sometimes, because I'd love to hear the history of Stuck in the Rut, and I'd love to get into some of the family stuff, because I'm fascinated with the people who've been hunting their whole lives, and you got a pretty well-known family that's killed some, really well-known stuff. So I would love to, at some point in the future, get back into this. Before we get into some of the technical stuff, because sometimes I feel like if I leave the plugs until the end, some people tune out by then. Let me know about some of the courses you guys are doing, because we're going to get into some more technical stuff. And I feel like if people really, you're one of the rare dudes that I would feel very comfortable sending BC guys to, because some of those other workshops that people are doing, I'm like, don't waste your time, man, because the stuff you're going to learn down there is not going to translate to what you're going to be doing back home. But I feel like the stuff you guys are doing does translate to what the types of problems BC guys are trying to solve. So why don't you give me a rundown on that, and then we'll close out with some more like specific tactical questions.
Yeah. So I've been wanting to do an online elk course. There's just a lot, like it's kind of flooded, the market has right now.
Yeah.
So I've just kind of backed off on it. I just focused on my mule deer and the wolf online classes. So and I feel like it's really relatable to BC hunters, just because it's the same terrain, and a lot of our mountain ranges, even like I said, they extend
It's the same
into,
mountains. Yeah.
yeah. So it's the same mountain range. And so but I've hunted open country too. So these tactics have worked there as well. So so what I did is the mule deer course specifically. What I did is I put together this course to make it almost simple, to make it seem where it's more obvious for people. Not necessarily, I wouldn't say the word common sense, but I've had some guys, some really experienced mule deer hunters. I'll tell you the type of reviews I get. And one of the reviews I got was like, wow, like there was certain things that I noticed mule deer did that I didn't really understand until I took this course. Like now it makes sense. And I'll just give you a taste of that. Right. So one thing that I grew up is that these guys saying that mule deer are unpredictable, and the snow and with the snow conditions, you'll sometimes see muleys go, like it'll snow, you'll get a huge snow, and then all of a sudden the muleys go up. Like, why did the muleys go up in elevation with the snow? Or why did the muleys pull down with the snow? And so sometimes snow conditions were really confusing for people, right? What we have come to find out over time is, okay, well, why why do mule deer do what they do? And it has nothing to do with the depth of snow sometimes. Sometimes it has to do with the difference between powdered snow to crusty snow.
Hmm.
And I'm going to ask you this question. What do you think a mule deer would rather walk through, crust snow or powdered snow?
Well, I can tell you post holing as a human being is way worse than walking through powdered snow.
Yeah.
So if I was going to be intuitive, unless they can sit on top of the crust, if they're light enough or they got 4 feet and they can sit on top of the crust, maybe they would want to be, but my gut would say they would prefer to walk through powder.
Yeah. No, and I'm glad you brought that other thing up too. So I'd say yes on that. So, and especially with digging for their food source, they can't dig
Oh
it.
yeah, you can't dig through the crusty
They can't
stuff.
dig through the crust. And so I've had muleys go, so that you get that crust layer, like let's say it's
Yep.
30. Well, I guess so you're not in degrees, you're not in
Well,
Fahrenheit,
it's
you're Celsius,
Celsius,
right?
not Fahrenheit, but yeah,
Okay, so what's your freezing temperature? Zero
zero.
Celsius? Zero.
Yeah.
Okay. So like ours is 32 degrees Fahrenheit. And so, it gets a little warmer than that. Let's say it gets, sun rises that day. It gets up a little higher than freezing. And then at nighttime freezes. There's that elevation there where you got a crust layer now. And the muleys are going to avoid that. So they'll either go up or they'll go down.
Because it's
Or
colder up, so it never had a chance to get that melt and freeze layer, so they
exactly.
can dig through the powder at the
So
top.
they can still dig in the powder.
Okay.
So they'll go up into the powder where they can still dig. And so you'll see this layer. There's a section like this where muleys don't
It's
want to
dead
go.
zone.
Yeah, exactly. Or they'll wrap into a north slope
Okay.
where it didn't get sun at all, right?
Right.
And so there's that. Also, let's say it just really warmed up north and south slope. Then the north slope is all crusted, but then the south slope melted to where the grass is showing again. Then they're going to go in the south slope, right?
Right.
But then you also brought up another point. So this typically I see during where they're shedding their antlers. It's just where it just crust so hard to where now the muleys can stand on it and they can reach the moss.
Right.
And
So this is interesting. The underlying principle here is access to food more than just what the snow is almost their reaction to the snow is a byproduct, not a direct reaction to the snow itself, because it changes their ability to access food.
yes, exactly. So that's just a clip like that. That's just a teaser of what you can learn in the Mule Deer Masterclass, right?
Okay.
And it's things like that. And then also, obviously, the snow conditions are going to be so different in southern Idaho too, and we
Right.
teach that there. And then also just glassing tactics, how to the art of timber pounding, which is there's a lot of stuff you were saying too that you brought up that nobody talks about calling in muleys.
Nope.
And honestly, I can't find it online either. A lot of it had to be self-taught and also just old timers, just years and years of experience passing that knowledge to me.
Yeah.
Like my dad, and like it's so cool to be around the table around guys like my dad and these old timers that they've hunted the 1980s.
That's what I felt like hanging out with Steve on the island
Yeah.
for a week. I was just like, oh my God, dude. Like
Yeah.
the amount of stuff that just comes out that he's not even really thinking of. I mean, I think his blacktail calling stuff, he's the best online resource I heard for that. And I think a lot of it is transferable
It
to
is.
the mule deer. Like I think it's the same strategies, the same tools. Like, yeah, for sure.
People were shocked when I tell them I rattled in muleys. I'm like, yeah, I
Yeah.
do it all the
Yeah.
time. But it goes back to this. Why wouldn't a muley buck come into a rattle?
Yeah.
What are some ideas of why a muley wouldn't come into a rattle?
Well, I would think number one, they can't hear it. Like if you're too far away,
That
for
could be
sure.
one.
Yeah.
If he's on a hot doe too.
Yep.
I had that where I'm looking at a muley buck and I'm rattling. He's already on a hot doe. He has no reason to look at you. I've literally watched this in the timber. This is like 80, 100 yards away where a buck, he chased the doe. He mounts the doe. As soon as he done his deed, he comes right into me.
Wild.
I was just like, now he's interested.
Yep.
But he heard me the whole time. And I didn't realize. I was like, oh, he must not hear me. After he bred the doe, he's like, okay, now I'll come to the rattle.
Yeah.
Now I'll see what's up.
A very somewhat similar situation I ran into. So pulled unit 36 in New Mexico, crazy, bulls everywhere. First 5 days, I'm calling like very typical Western style calling, location bugle, try and close the distance, challenge bugle, very textbook stuff. And I cannot close the deal. And then what I realized was there was so many bulls with like little groups of cows that they're actually using their location bugles to bounce off of each other. They don't want to run into any of these other elk. They're sick of fighting. They've all got their 3 or 4 cows. And so when I was location bugling, and I was just so excited I was getting bugles, like I thought that was the win. And then by day 5, I'm like, okay, like great, I can get them to call back. That's not the win. The win is sticking an arrow in one of these guys. Yeah. And I had to shut up. It was okay to location bugle at first. And then the funny thing is I finally peeled off a satellite bull, the way I was able to kill one. And it wasn't a giant, but it was my first elk with the bow, solo, 10,000 feet. Like I was a nice 6-point, like he'll do. And we got across this little basin and I'm bugling, he's bugling back. Like we're going at each other, but like 10 minutes, he will not close the deal. And then I thought to myself, he's sick of getting beat up. He doesn't want to come over here for another bull. Literally threw some cow mews over my shoulder into the opposing basin, and I just heard the sticks start popping. And so it was interesting. So I would think that would be another, sometimes population density can almost work against you calling animals, where if there's too many, they're not looking to find each other sometimes.
Yeah, no, elk hunting's like that too. So I did that in central Montana with elk, and you just like some of those elk, you got such a high population. Like you said, there's bugles. Your bugles it just disappears in the rest of the bugles.
Yep.
And you said it yourself. They're just not focusing coming into other bugles. There's bulls everywhere, and yeah, you have to spot and stalk them. So yeah, but that is what you brought up there. That is a great example of adapting, because you can't teach somebody that. You can't teach somebody that that's the perfect scenario, right? Like you have to, there's a part of it where you learn from, I mean, you can learn a little bit, right? You got to learn how to use an elk call and stuff, but there's a point there in your calling sequence where you had to say to yourself, you had to think like that bull. You're like, this bull's not going to want to come into a bugle at this point.
No.
Like he doesn't want to get whooped. He's a satellite bull. He wants a cow. Yeah. Give him a cow. And that's exactly what you gave him.
Yeah. Came in on a rope to 30. It was like he didn't hesitate, man. Like closed 150 yards in 45 seconds and then just stood just looking. You know what I mean? Like just lined up broadside. It was one of the most beautiful things of my life. Like it was that's perfect.
Awesome. Yeah. No, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, because that's the example that I was looking for.
Okay, so online we got access to the mule deer masterclass, we got the wolf masterclass, and then
I'm doing an in-person. I'm doing an in-person
elk thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just because I'm like, it actually takes more time to create an online class than it is to come up with an in-person elk camp.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of going next level at the elk camp. There's a lot of elk camps out there where they're 3-day events, and they're more affordable than what I'm offering.
Yep.
But I want to give everybody a thorough elk camp, and I feel like it takes 5 days to do it.
Yeah, fair enough.
I really strongly believe that. And this is my second year in doing that. And I had really positive reviews. We're keeping it a smaller camp, but we still have available spots, by the way, if a couple people want to jump on.
What are the dates for that?
So I should have prepared.
you need to be a better salesman.
Yeah.
Although it's a good signal that you're not.
Yeah. So let me pull the dates out. I always have to keep looking here just because, it's in July. I'd like to say let me just pull this up really quick. Yeah, I should have known this. All right. So it's I like to say it's the 19th, 20th. Let me look. How about this? I'm going to look at my
you know
website.
What? For everybody listening to this, I'm going to put links to all this stuff in the show
notes.
It's
on the website.
and I'll put the dates of all this kind of stuff too. So if you are interested, you can follow up that way. And
That's
we'll
it.
let's
Yeah.
close out with a couple of
Yeah. Yeah. So the wolf one and the elk one is both, and I do have a wolf one too. If somebody wants an in-person wolf class, some people wanted that instead. So I'm like, yeah. So we're doing a second year of a wolf camp as well in Cascade, Idaho. So
okay.
that's in July as well.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome.
Put the link. It's stuckinrut.com and all the dates are there. So yeah.
Perfect. Uh okay, first one's kind of a joke. Rusty wants to know if Tom ever eats fried chicken on the mountain.
On the mountain,
Yeah.
fried chicken sounds great, but no, I do freeze dried meals.
Okay.
And
Do
so
you know Rusty, baby booners? I feel like this is some kind of inside joke.
this it sounds like a name. Like thing is, like if I saw the profile, I'd be like, yes, I know who that is.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I love like I do freeze dried meals,
Yeah, same.
and yeah, and I get really. I don't know if it's just my age, but my stomach doesn't handle the mountain houses as well.
So do you
And
do
now
your own freeze
I do
dried?
my own freeze dried meals. Yes.
Okay.
So I make my own recipes and then I hand my recipes to my wife and then she makes it. So my favorite meals that I made is a goulash where
Okay.
it's just a bunch of meat, bunch of elk meat, pasta, spaghetti sauce. I mix some pork in there too for the flavoring um, and some pepperoni. And it's just, yeah, it's kind of like a goulash mix. And then whatever seasoning she puts in that. And then I also do a chicken, soy chicken and rice is a really good one. You know, my favorite though is just like candy. It's not really a meal, but it's like candy is like freeze dried pineapple. Man,
Really?
oh, it's
Huh.
awesome. And I get a big bag and man, I have to stop myself every so often just because I'm like, I just start snacking on it too much. But it's so nice when you're on a hunt, it's so nice to have something sweet, you know,
Yeah, I agree.
and not
Yeah.
candy, but like something's fruit. Like I like that. I just like that sugar, you know, that you crave that sugar. And so
Yeah.
that fruit is for me. The one thing I'll say is the best energy though is smoked salmon. Like I get more energy off smoked salmon. I don't like than any other wild game
I
or
wonder if it's
anything
a
else.
fat content because
I
wild
think
game
it
is
is. It's
particularly lean.
it's the fish. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the fatty acids or not the fatty acids, the what do you call that? Um your omega threes. What do you call those? Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. My brain's drawing a blank. I worked a full day today, by the
Yeah.
way. So if
All
I'm feeling
good.
a little spacey, it was a long day. But anyways, yeah, good. Hopefully that answered his question.
Yeah.
If that was
Uh,
joking or not.
yeah. I don't know. I think there was something there.
Yeah.
Um, do. Oh, this is an interesting question because I almost think I'm not a fan of the question. But I'm gonna ask it the way he wrote it anyways.
Do it.
He's got mule deer on camera. How do you find the spot that they rut in?
So it depends what time of the year did he get the photo. So if he gets the photo in July, then you're going to have to find where the does are. So, or if he got that photo during the rut, then maybe that's his regular route. So that just all depends on where he got that photo of that buck, because where they shed is going to be different where they summer, and
Yeah.
where they summer is going to be different where they rut. I don't see bucks with does, especially the big bucks. They're not with does before the rut.
Yeah.
And so one thing what I'll do is I'll at least in that area, I'll try to if there's a big buck I'm after, but he's like, I want to try killing him during the rut. I find the does. I'm so focused on the does. You're going to have better luck killing that buck having does on your trail camera. It's the same with bull elk. How many guys have I heard say, I had this big bull on my trail camera all summer long. All of a sudden he disappeared. I have no
Yeah.
clue where he went in September. Where do you think he went? He's looking for cows.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting though. As soon as the rut's over, all of a sudden that bull starts showing back up on the trail cam. Like
Yeah.
if the snow doesn't pull him out, he'll actually go to the same areas that he feels safe. He feels safe in those areas. He felt safe in June and July. He also feels safe in there in October until the snow pulls him out and he has to find a different spot. hopefully that answered the question.
See, and my 2 cents on this is I'm losing my fascination with the deer rut. Like I think when you first start hunting, you think, oh, the rut is when I want to hunt because that's when there's the most activity. But I'm
Yeah.
also starting to learn that's also when there's the most randomness. And yeah, you might run across a big buck that just pops in out of nowhere that you've never seen before, and he's just chasing some doe. But especially as a guy who uses more archery than rifle tackle, the more old timers I talk to and the more time I spend looking, the less I like hunting deer in the rut. Art elk, yes, 100%. I'm still full blown. Love the rut, love calling, screaming bulls, love it. But when it comes to even I've hunted whitetail the last 3 years in a row in the rut, and I'm getting stumped every year. I'm targeting pre-rut this year because I think they're more predictable. And so I think you have a more of a lottery ticket in the rut where you might randomly run into a big guy. But I think if you found a deer and you want to kill him, my 2 cents is I think your odds of predictably killing that deer might be better outside of the rut.
Pre-rut's good, if you can catch them, and that depends like on glassy and other things like that, I'd say.
Yeah.
What's really fun is if you get it. I love tracking bucks.
I was
And
just about to say snow would change everything because if you can catch a buck on a doe, that also means you're actually going to be able to catch up to him because she's going to be taking her time. They're going to be nibbling as they go. And it's going to, catching a lone buck just cruising, I think can be challenging. But catching a buck tailing a doe in the rut, that 100% I think would be that was where the rut's going to work for you.
I've killed a lot of bucks tracking, and well, the one I killed in Montana was quite interesting. He had a route too. So it's random, but not. It's definitely in October, like be pre-rut.
Yeah.
And in September, they have obviously a little bit more of a pattern. They're just feeding and bedding down, right?
Right.
And so like if I can get an early snow before the rut, if I hit a big buck track, I'll bump him 300 yards
Right.
of hiking. Like he just went from feeding the bedding down, But in the rut, like you said, they're roaming, and it can be really difficult to catch up to them. But if they're on a doe, which I've had happen to me more than once,
Yeah.
like I'll see the doe tracks, I'll follow them. And, don't be alarmed if the buck leaves the does, because he's rutting so hard, and he'll just push a doe off the group of does as the does are feeding. And what you'll do, you'll burn yourself out trying to follow his tracks the whole day, because he'll go up and then he'll come back to those does again. He'll go down, he'll come back to those does again. So what I do is I just stick to those does, but I keep looking around. I look all around me. I'm hiking, but as I'm hiking, I'm looking all around me because he's going to stay with those does, although he's doing his rut thing. But I'm always just keeping, looking off to the side, because typically if I finally catch up the does and there they are, I'm like, where is he? And he could be 50 yards to the right, or he could be 50 yards to the left. I had it, and it was year 2020. The buck left the does for a second. I passed him, and then he got back to the tracks and he followed me. And then I looked behind me. I'm like, I'm not seeing his tracks anymore. Look behind me. There he is, 10 yards away, staring at me. Beautiful. What did he's like I like to say he was a 7x7. Because he was a mainframe 5x5, and he had two kickers on both sides. But just a cool video of a timber buck. You have to see that video.
Yeah.
I'm not just saying this because it was me, but I'm like, I think your heart will race just watching the video. It'll remind you of that thick, heavy timber.
Yeah.
And it's a great video. But anyways, yeah,
What's that video called? The funny thing is where do you find? And I think what he's looking for is like elevation or because he's looking where do they rut? The other tip I'm going to throw out that Steve talked about in his early videos, and he calls these things rut holes. And I like how you alluded to there's a difference between finding the odd rut and finding the odd rub and finding groups of rubs or paths of rubs.
Yeah.
So Steve would talk about these things he would call rut holes. And it was like his pot of gold when you'd come into this little clearing. And a lot of times with blacktail, we're hunting super steep stuff. I'm looking for little benches. It's old growth. And you'd find these rub fields where you could literally see 20 rubs just standing in one place. And it was almost exactly something like that where I killed my first blacktail and I called him right into there. But I think that would be another thing that I would urge this guy to look for is like, where are you finding those, like not just one-off rubs, but like a density of rubs? But his question is, how does he find the areas where mule deer are rutting?
Yeah. And so it just, for me, when I'm in the rut, I am looking for does. And so it's like, I know that buck's in the area.
Yeah.
I'm focused on the does. And so I find every single group of doe possible. And then what I do is I try to not bump them. So my routine, if I want to tell you exactly kind of my routine during the rut, I'm just keeping track of does. And if he's not there, if I know he's in the area, he will not, it's not if, he will check those does.
Right.
He's got to. And he's not, and if you actually spend a little more time in open country, what you're going to see, and it happens, it's the same thing in timber, you just can't see it as much, is these bucks, they'll come through, they'll check every single doe, nothing's in heat, sometimes they'll leave. And so then what happens though is they can sense when a doe is going to come into heat, even if it's going to be a day from now. That's when they're going to start lingering a little bit longer with those does.
Right.
And so for me, that's how I'm killing bucks that I have sheds to. This is how I'm killing bucks that I got trail cam photos of. It's because all of a sudden my focus is no longer on where is he summering. I am looking for the does, and I'm only focused on the does. I'm not going to look for him. Like he's going to come, as long as I'm focusing on the does, he's going to come to me.
Right.
So finding those rut holes like you're talking about, there's these pockets where those does hang out. And I've used the term, I made up when we're by ourselves in the woods, we just make up our own terms. I call them rub lines.
Yeah.
And with there, you'll just see a buck where he'll just make a rub line, and part of it is marking his territory because he's got scent glands on his head.
Right.
If you feel his head and it's sticky, it's like that sticky oily, that's all scent gland. He's leaving that behind. It's not just tracking bucks, it's tracking does. Like they're all tracking each other, and they find those little rut holes. And I've seen it where a buck has made that line and does will be in the area.
Right.
One time I did. So I went to the dollar store and I wanted to test this out. I bought a bunch of tampons and I hung them in trees, like in one area, 100-yard stretch. And it's in the following week, it didn't work for the first couple of days, but the following week it was stacked with muleys. And I only tried it one time. And I told myself, I'm like, I want to try that again.
Did you put anything on them?
Yeah, I just bought some online mule deer scent. It may have been synthetic, but I bought some urine.
Yeah, for sure. I've seen it on
Amazon. And I just put it on there and I did a line. I did 100-yard line with it.
Okay.
And they sucked in there.
That's wild.
Yeah. So it was interesting.
We're both getting the same call because my wife's texting me to go put my kids to bed, and you're getting the same call. So listen, man. Yeah. This was awesome, Tom. I really appreciate you taking the time. For everybody listening, show notes will be in there with all the details and a couple of the links, and we'll take it from there. Thanks, man. I really appreciate it.
Oh yeah, I had fun. Thank you for this time. I enjoy talking about hunting and stuff. So yeah.
All right, man. I'll let you go. Tend to your kids. We'll chat soon.
Hey, we'll see you.
All right. Cheers.